I will never forget the look on their faces when they walked into that courtroom. My ex-wife Grace clutching the arm of my former best friend Aiden, both of them smiling like they had already won. 4 years of marriage and 15 years of friendship reduced to this moment of ultimate betrayal. They strode in confidently whispering to each other, occasionally glancing my way with smug expressions. But instead of the rage, I expected to feel a strange calm washed over me. They thought this display would break me, but they had no idea what was coming. Before I tell you what happened next in that courtroom, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you have ever been double-crossed by someone you trusted, and subscribe to hear how I turned this devastating betrayal into the best decision of my life. To understand how we ended up in that courtroom, I need to take you back to the beginning. My name is Elliott, and until 2 years ago, I was living what I thought was a good life in Chicago. I work as a structural engineer for a construction company, specializing in earthquake-resistant designs. Outside of work, I have always been passionate about playing guitar and cooking elaborate meals for friends and family. I met Grace at a charity concert where my weekend band was performing. She approached me after our set complimented my guitar solo, and we started talking. Grace was beautiful, with dark brown hair that fell just past her shoulders, bright blue eyes that crinkled when she laughed, and a smile that could light up a room. But more than her looks, I was drawn to her energy and passion. She worked as a marketing executive for a cosmetics company, loved traveling, and had a quick wit that kept me on my toes. Our relationship progressed quickly. We dated for 2 years, taking trips together, meeting each other's families, and eventually moving in together. When I proposed on our 2nd anniversary during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan, she cried and said it was the happiest day of her life. We married 6 months later, in a ceremony surrounded by friends and family. Standing beside me through all of this was my best friend from college, Aiden. We had been inseparable since freshman year, when we were randomly assigned as roommates. He was the extrovert to my introvert, always pushing me out of my comfort zone in ways that helped me grow. He was my best man at the wedding, giving a heartfelt speech about our friendship and welcoming Grace into our circle. The 3 of us spent holidays together, took weekend trips, and had a standing monthly dinner tradition. The first 2 years of our marriage were everything I had hoped for. We bought a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood, with plans to eventually fill those extra rooms with children. We hosted dinner parties, joined a couple's book club, and seemed to be building the foundation for a lifetime together. When Grace mentioned wanting to wait a few more years before starting a family so she could focus on her career, I supported her completely. I wanted to be a father, but I also wanted my wife to feel fulfilled in her professional life. Looking back now, I can pinpoint when things began to change, though I was blind to it at the time. Around our 3rd anniversary, Grace started updating her wardrobe, spending more time at the gym, and coming home later from work. She became protective of her phone, changed her passwords, and would often step out of the room to take calls. When I asked about these changes, she would dismiss my concerns, saying I was being paranoid or that she was just trying to advance at work. I tried everything to save our marriage. I suggested counseling, planned date nights, and attempted to communicate more openly about my feelings. Grace would participate half-heartedly in these efforts, only to revert to her distant behavior within days. I blamed myself, thinking I had become boring or too focused on work. I even took cooking classes to make more exciting meals and started working out more, hoping to reignite the spark between us. During this difficult period, Aiden became an even more frequent presence in our lives. He would stop by, unannounced, offering to take Grace out for lunch when I was working late or suggesting the 3 of us go to dinner. I was grateful for his friendship, seeing him as a stabilizing force during a rocky time in my marriage. I even confided in him about my concerns, asking for his perspective as someone who knew both of us well. "You know how women are, Elliott," he told me over beers one night. "They need constant excitement and attention. Maybe Grace is just going through a phase. Have you tried surprising her more? Being more spontaneous?" I took his advice to heart, never suspecting that he might have ulterior motives. In fact, I was so trusting that I specifically asked him to talk to Grace to see if she would open up to him about what was wrong in our marriage. I thought that as my best friend, he could help bridge the communication gap between us. "Of course, buddy," he had said, patting my shoulder. "Anything to help you guys out. Your happiness means everything to me." I believed him completely. That was my first mistake. The day I discovered their betrayal started like any other Tuesday. I had a client meeting scheduled for the afternoon, but it was canceled last minute. Rather than staying at the office, I decided to head home early and surprise Grace with dinner. Maybe this spontaneity was exactly what Aiden had suggested we needed. I stopped at the grocery store to pick up ingredients for Grace's favorite pasta dish, along with a bottle of the Cabernet she loved. As I pulled into our driveway, around 4:30 p.m., I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street but thought nothing of it. Our neighborhood often had visitors, and I was focused on my plan to reconnect with my wife. When I entered our home, I heard music playing upstairs along with the sound of laughter. Grace must have come home early too, I thought. Perhaps she was on the phone with a friend. I quietly set the groceries down in the kitchen, thinking I would surprise her. As I climbed the stairs, the laughter grew louder, and I realized there were two distinct voices. One was definitely Grace, and the other, though muffled, sounded strangely familiar. Our bedroom door was partially open. I approached slowly, a growing sense of dread building in my stomach. Through the crack in the door, I saw clothing scattered across the floor. Grace's work blouse, a pair of men's jeans I did not recognize. When I pushed the door open fully, the sight that greeted me was one that would forever be burned into my memory. There in our bed, the bed we had shared for 4 years, were Grace and Aiden, my wife, and my best friend. They did not notice me at first, too engrossed in each other. It was only when I dropped the bottle of wine, the crash of glass against hardwood startling them, that they became aware of my presence. For a moment, no one moved, the three of us frozen in a tableau of betrayal. Then Grace pulled the sheet up to cover herself while Aiden scrambled to find his discarded shirt. Elliott, Grace finally said, her voice oddly calm. "You are home early." The casualness of her statement, as if I had merely interrupted her watching television rather than having sex with my best friend, sparked a rage I had never felt before. I lunged toward Aiden, my fist raised, ready to strike the man who had betrayed 15 years of friendship, but I stopped myself inches from his face, realizing he was not worth the assault charge that would surely follow. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. They exchanged a glance, some silent communication passing between them that excluded me just as their affair had. "Does it matter?" Aiden replied, and I was shocked by the lack of remorse in his voice. 8 months, Grace said simultaneously, at least having the decency to look somewhat ashamed. 8 months. While I had been trying to save my marriage, planning special dinners, suggesting counseling, they had been carrying on behind my back. 8 months that aligned exactly with when I had asked Aiden to talk to Grace about our problems. "You know, Elliott," Grace said, her initial shock giving way to defensiveness. "This would not have happened if you had not been so caught up in your work. You were never really present. And let's be honest," Aiden added, pulling on his pants with casual disregard for my presence. "Things between you two have been dead for a long time." Grace needed someone who could actually excite her. Their attempts to justify their actions to somehow make me responsible for their betrayal cleared my head of any lingering confusion. In that moment, I knew exactly what I needed to do. "I want both of you out of my house in 5 minutes," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Grace, take what you need for tonight. You can come back for the rest of your things when I am at work. You cannot kick me out of my own house." Grace protested, her sense of entitlement astonishing given the circumstances. "Actually, I can. The house is primarily in my name, and I have just caught you committing adultery in it. You have 5 minutes before I call the police and report trespassers." I turned and walked downstairs, ignoring their protests and accusations. Once in the kitchen, I called my sister, who lived 30 minutes away, and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. I needed witnesses and support people who would prevent me from making rash decisions in the heat of emotion. Within the week that followed, my world continued to crumble. Grace returned while I was at work and took not only her belongings but several expensive items we had received as wedding gifts. She left a note informing me she would be staying with Aiden for the foreseeable future and expected to receive her fair share of our assets. The betrayal affected me physically. I could not sleep, lost my appetite, and struggled to focus at work. Friends began taking sides, with some believing outrageous stories that Aiden and Grace were spreading about me being controlling or emotionally unavailable. The pain of losing not only my wife, but also my best friend and several other friendships was almost unbearable. The final straw came when I discovered that Grace had withdrawn nearly $50,000 from our joint savings account money we had been setting aside for a future down payment on a vacation property. That was the moment I knew I needed legal protection. The next morning I filed for divorce. Finding the right attorney was my first priority. After researching and meeting with several options, I hired Susan Blake, a divorce attorney known for her thoroughness and unwillingness to back down. During our first consultation, Susan listened to my story without judgment, then laid out a straightforward plan. Elliott infidelity may not affect the division of assets in all cases, but we can use it to counter any claims she makes about deserving more than her fair share. Susan explained. We need to gather evidence of the affair, document the money she took, and build a case showing your contributions to the marriage. Over the next several weeks, Susan and I worked methodically. I provided bank statements showing I had contributed 90% of the down payment on our house using inheritance from my grandparents. We documented Grace's recent spending sprees, revealing multiple charges at high-end hotels dating back months before I discovered the affair. I recovered deleted emails from our shared computer that showed Grace and Aiden discussing their relationship as far back as 10 months ago, contradicting their claim of 8 months. The most damning evidence came from text messages I had managed to recover from a cloud backup of Grace's old phone, which had been linked to our shared tablet. In these messages, Grace and Aiden explicitly discussed their plan to secure the house and get as much as possible from the divorce. One message from Grace particularly stood out. Elliott makes good money and is too nice to fight back hard. We just need to make him look bad enough that he will give up what we want to avoid the embarrassment. While I focused on building our legal case, Aiden began a campaign to isolate me from our mutual friends. He spread rumors that I had been emotionally abusive to Grace, that I had controlled the finances and left her without resources, and even suggested that I had been unfaithful first. Some friends believed him without question, while others reached out to hear my side. I decided to focus on those who sought truth, rather than drama, grateful for the handful of loyal friends who stood by me. Grace's demands, when they finally came through her attorney, were outrageous. She wanted the house despite having contributed minimally to its purchase. She demanded my car, claiming hers was insufficient for her needs. She asked for 60% of all assets, including my retirement accounts, and requested spousal support that amounted to almost a third of my monthly income. Her justification was that she had sacrificed career advancement to support my work, a claim that was demonstrably false given her recent promotion. Susan warned me that the initial hearing might be challenging. They are going to try to paint you as the villain, Elliott. Grace will likely play the role of the neglected wife, and they will bring up any argument you ever had as evidence of a toxic relationship. The key is to stay calm and let me handle the talking. Your job is to appear reasonable and cooperative. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, I focused on rebuilding my physical and mental health. I returned to the gym, started seeing a therapist to process my anger and sense of betrayal, and even began meditating to help maintain my composure. I knew that facing Grace and Aiden in court would be one of the hardest things I ever had to do, and I wanted to be prepared. 2 days before the hearing, my friend Marcus called to warn me that Grace and Aiden had been boasting at a party about their strategy. They think they have it in the bag. Man, Marcus told me. They were laughing about how they are going to leave you with nothing but debt. They even joked about buying a vacation home with the settlement money. Rather than letting this information discourage me, it strengthened my resolve. I shared it with Susan, who added it to our growing pile of evidence, demonstrating Grace's bad faith. We were as prepared as we could be, but I still felt a knot of anxiety as the hearing date approached. This was not just about money or property. It was about standing up for myself against 2 people who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The morning of the divorce hearing arrived with a strange sense of finality. I had barely slept the night before rehearsing scenarios in my mind and trying to prepare for whatever tactics Grace and her attorney might employ. Susan had advised me to wear my best suit, speak only when directly addressed by the judge, and to maintain a neutral expression regardless of what was said. The courthouse was an imposing stone building in downtown Chicago. I arrived 30 minutes early and met Susan in the lobby, where she gave me a reassuring nod and a brief rundown of what to expect. We were reviewing our documents one last time when the glass doors swung open and Grace and Aiden walked in. The sight of them together still had the power to knock the wind out of me. Grace was wearing a designer dress I had never seen before, likely purchased with our joint funds. Her hair was professionally styled, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who expected to get exactly what she wanted. Beside her, Aiden wore an expensive suit and a smug expression. Their hands were intertwined, a deliberate display meant to hurt and intimidate me. They spotted us across the lobby, and Grace whispered something to Aiden that made him laugh. He squeezed her hand and gave me a look that clearly said, "I won." In that moment, I realized they truly believed they were going to walk away victorious with my money, my house, and no consequences for their betrayal. Susan placed a steadying hand on my arm. "Remember the plan," she whispered. "Let them be overconfident. It will work in our favor." We entered the courtroom and took our places at the plaintiff's table. Grace's attorney, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s named Diana Powell, was known for her aggressive tactics. She and Grace exchanged friendly smiles as they arranged their materials, while Aiden took a seat directly behind them, close enough to participate in their whispered conversations. The judge, a stern-looking man named Judge Robert Carver, entered the room and the proceedings began. As expected, Diana opened with a character assassination portraying Grace as a devoted wife who had been emotionally neglected by her workaholic husband. "Your Honor, my client supported Mr. Wright through his career advancement, maintaining their home and social connections while he prioritized work above their marriage. After years of emotional distance, she found comfort and understanding with another individual. While regrettable, this relationship began only after the marriage was effectively over due to Mr. Wright's neglect." She went on to outline Grace's demands, framing them as reasonable compensation for her contributions to the marriage. Throughout this presentation, Grace nodded solemnly, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue for dramatic effect. Aiden maintained his position of supportive boyfriend, leaning forward to squeeze her shoulder at particularly emotional moments in Diana's speech. When it was Susan's turn, she approached the matter with a calm professionalism that contrasted sharply with Diana's dramatic flair. "Your Honor, we have evidence that directly contradicts Mrs. Wright's characterization of this marriage and the circumstances of its dissolution. With your permission, I would like to present documentation showing a pattern of deception and financial impropriety on Mrs. Wright's part." Judge Carver nodded, and Susan began methodically presenting our case. She started with the timeline of the affair, using recovered text messages and hotel receipts to demonstrate that Grace and Aiden's relationship had begun long before they claimed. The confidence on Grace's face began to falter as Susan projected these messages onto a screen for the court to see. "As you can see, Your Honor, these messages between Mrs. Wright and Mr. Bennett date back 10 months, not the 8 they claimed, nor did this relationship begin after the marriage was over. In fact, these communications began specifically when Mr. Wright asked his friend Mr. Bennett to help save his marriage." The judge's expression darkened as he reviewed the messages, particularly ones where Grace and Aiden explicitly mocked my efforts to repair the relationship. But the real turning point came when Susan introduced the private investigator's report. "Your Honor, after discovering the unauthorized withdrawal of $50,000 from the couple's joint savings account, Mr. Wright hired a licensed private investigator to document Mrs. Wright's activities. This report contains photographs, video evidence, and financial tracking showing Mrs. Wright and Mr. Bennett staying at luxury hotels, purchasing expensive gifts, and discussing their plans to, and I quote from their own text messages, take Elliott for everything he is worth." Gasps echoed through the courtroom as Susan displayed photographs of Grace and Aiden entering various hotels, along with the corresponding charges on our joint credit card. Grace's face had lost all color, while Aiden shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly unable to meet my eyes. The coup de grace came when Susan presented evidence of their premeditated financial strategy. "Most disturbing, Your Honor, is this series of messages where Mrs. Wright and Mr. Bennett explicitly discuss their plan to manipulate the divorce proceedings. They outline strategies to make false claims about Mr. Bennett. Wright's behavior to justify their demands for a disproportionate division of assets. Susan projected a particularly damning message exchange. Grace, once we get the house and the settlement, we can finally take that trip to Bali we've been talking about. Aiden, just stick to the story. Act sad and wronged. The judge will side with you because you're the wife. Grace, Elliott is such a pushover. He would rather give me everything than have people know how pathetic he was for not seeing what was happening right under his nose. The courtroom fell silent as these messages remained displayed on the screen. Diana attempted to object, questioning the legitimacy of the evidence, but Susan had meticulously documented the chain of custody for all materials. Judge Carver overruled the objection and asked Grace directly about the messages. Mrs. Wright, are you prepared to testify under oath that these messages are fabricated? Grace glanced nervously at her attorney before responding. They are taken out of context, Your Honor. And what context would justify conspiring to deliberately mislead this court, the judge asked. When Grace failed to provide a satisfactory answer, Judge Carver turned his attention to the financial evidence. Susan presented documentation showing that I had contributed the majority of funds for the house purchase using inherited money, which under state law remained separate property not subject to division. She demonstrated my consistent contributions to household expenses compared to Grace's spending patterns that had increased dramatically once her affair with Aiden began. As the evidence mounted, a visible shift occurred in the dynamic between Grace and Aiden. What had started as a united front began to fracture under pressure. Grace whispered accusingly to Aiden, who responded with a dismissive shrug. Their body language, once intimate and supportive, grew tense and defensive. The breaking point came when Judge Carver directly questioned Aiden about his role in the situation. Mr. Bennett, given your close friendship with Mr. Wright, prior to your involvement with Mrs. Wright, do you believe your actions demonstrate good faith and honesty? Aiden, clearly unprepared for direct questioning, stammered before responding. I did not intend for things to happen this way, Your Honor. Grace convinced me that Elliott was not treating her right. She said their marriage was already over in all but name. Grace's head snapped toward him, her expression one of shock and betrayal. That is not true. You were the one who kept pursuing me, saying Elliott did not deserve me. Come on, Grace. Aiden retorted, his composure cracking. You were the one who came up with the whole plan to get the house and the money. You said it would be easy to make Elliott look bad. You lying jerk. You told me you loved me, that we would build a life together with the settlement. Their argument escalated, with each blaming the other for the affair and the subsequent attempt to manipulate the divorce proceedings. Judge Carver repeatedly banged his gavel, calling for order, but Grace and Aiden were too engrossed in their mutual recriminations to heed the warning. Their public meltdown did more to damage their case than any evidence we could have presented. When order was finally restored, Judge Carver's expression made it clear he had seen enough. He called for a brief recess, during which Diana attempted to salvage her client's position by suggesting a more modest settlement. Susan, sensing our advantage, held firm. When court resumed, Judge Carver delivered his ruling with evident disappointment in Grace's conduct. He awarded me the house, given my significant separate property contribution to its purchase. He ordered Grace to return the $50,000 she had withdrawn from our joint account, minus her legitimate share. He denied her request for spousal support, citing her lack of financial need, as evidenced by her recent promotion and salary increase. Grace left the courtroom in tears, with Aiden trailing awkwardly behind, no longer holding her hand or offering comfort. Their united front had crumbled under the weight of their own deception, revealing the selfish, opportunistic nature of their relationship. As they pushed through the courtroom doors, I heard Grace accuse Aiden of ruining everything, to which he responded that she should be grateful he had stuck around at all. In that moment, watching them turn on each other just as they had turned on me, I felt no joy or vindication, only a profound sadness for what had been lost, and relief that this chapter of my life was finally closing. In the aftermath of the divorce hearing, I found myself in a strange, emotional landscape. Legally victorious but personally devastated, I wandered through the following weeks in a daze of contradictory feelings. The house that I had fought to keep now felt empty and tainted by memories. My career, once a source of pride, seemed meaningless when I had no one to share my accomplishments with. Even my friendships had been fractured by the divorce, with social circles realigning around either Grace and Aiden or myself. Though I had won in court, I recognized that staying in Chicago meant living in the shadow of betrayal. Every restaurant, park, and street corner held memories of my life with Grace, or my friendship with Aiden. I needed a clean break, a fresh start somewhere, untouched by their presence. 2 months after the hearing, I accepted a job offer from a firm in Denver, Colorado. The position came with a significant salary increase and the opportunity to work on more environmentally focused projects, something I had always been passionate about. I sold the Chicago house for a modest profit, found a comfortable apartment in downtown Denver, and began the process of rebuilding my life from scratch. The early days in Denver were challenging. Despite the breathtaking mountain views and welcoming colleagues, I felt profoundly alone. At 35, I was starting over in a city where I knew no one, processing the end of both my marriage and my longest friendship. There were nights when the silence in my apartment became so overwhelming that I would drive around the city just to feel some connection to the world outside my grief. Healing came gradually, in small but meaningful steps. I joined a local climbing gym, challenging myself physically, while meeting people who shared my love of the outdoors. I signed up for cooking classes at a community center, rediscovering the joy I had once found in creating meals. Most importantly, I continued weekly sessions with a therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma, working through the trust issues that now colored my perspective on relationships. 6 months into my new life, I found myself playing guitar at an open mic night in a small coffee shop near my apartment. It was the first time I had performed publicly since moving to Denver, and though my hands trembled slightly, the act of creating music again felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been dormant. After my set, a group of local musicians invited me to join their weekly jam sessions. These gatherings became an anchor in my week, a reminder that connection was still possible, even after devastating betrayal. Through my new friends, I became involved in a volunteer program teaching music to underprivileged youth. Working with these children, watching their faces light up when they mastered a simple chord or rhythm, healed something broken inside me. Their uncomplicated joy and trust reminded me that my capacity to form meaningful connections had not been destroyed by Grace and Aiden's actions, only temporarily damaged. As my social circle expanded, I began to recognize the warning signs I had missed in my relationship with Grace and my friendship with Aiden. I learned to value actions over words, to establish healthy boundaries, and to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. Most importantly, I discovered that vulnerability did not have to equal vulnerability, that opening myself to new relationships did not mean leaving myself defenseless against betrayal. News about Grace and Aiden occasionally reached me through mutual friends who had stayed in touch. Their relationship had imploded just 3 months after the divorce was finalized, with Aiden reportedly leaving Grace for another woman in their social circle. Grace had moved back to her hometown in Michigan, after being passed over for a promotion she had been certain was hers. There was a poetic justice in their outcomes that I took no pleasure in recognizing, that their capacity for betrayal would likely follow them into future relationships. 1 year after the courthouse confrontation, my life had transformed in ways I could never have anticipated. My career was thriving, with a recent promotion to project lead on a sustainable housing development. I had a close circle of genuine friends who knew my story and respected the boundaries I had established. I had even begun cautiously dating again, approaching new relationships with honest communication about my past experiences and expectations. The pain of betrayal had not disappeared entirely. There were still moments when a random memory would catch me off guard, temporarily reopening old wounds. But these moments became less frequent and less intense with time. The betrayal that had once defined my life had been reframed as a painful but valuable lesson, teaching me about resilience, self-respect, and the importance of choosing wisely whom to trust. Sometimes what appears to be the worst day of your life turns out to be the first day of a better one. What painful experience has ultimately led you to a better place in your life? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming betrayal and building a stronger life. Do not forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible after heartbreak. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the best revenge is not getting even, it is living well.